All right. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Good evening, everybody. My name is Azra Karim Rashford, and on behalf of the entire network secretariat team, I would like to welcome you to this second webinar in our IMRF Dialogue series. This webinar will focus on the objectives on the discussion in the IMRF's second round table. And to support the discussion, the network has prepared a note with the preliminary progress on those objectives. We have also prepared a set of guiding questions, which will be posted in the chat of this, platform. Now, in advance of the webinar, we've also set up a discussion space on the Network Hub. We've noticed that many of you are shy, but we do really encourage everybody to visit those discussion spaces, as they are an excellent opportunity for a more informal exchange on the different objectives. I'm also confident that today many of you will be sharing different practices and examples from your respective countries or regions. And I really would like to invite everybody as a follow-up to these meetings, to discuss, to submit those practices to the repository on the Network Hub. The Hub very much has the potential to be a pool of practices that will allow us from our end, and also yourself, to then track the progress and the trend in the implementation of the Global Compact. So based on today's discussions here, as well as on the practices that you will be submitting to the repository of practices on the Network Hub, as well as on the discussions that will hopefully become more vibrant on the network's discussion spaces, the network will finalize the background notes for Roundtable 2 of the IMRF as mandated by the General Assembly. And those background notes will be made available to member states 6 weeks ahead of the IMRF. Now, since we last spoke during the webinar in preparation of Roundtable 1, there have been two important developments that I would just like to highlight here as well. First of all, the President of the General Assembly has informed member states and stakeholders that the dates of the IMRF have been pushed back with 1 week. So the IMRF will now take place on the 17th of May till the 20th of May, and will be preceded by a stakeholder consultation on the 16th of May. And the second point that I would just like to highlight is that the Secretary General report on the Global Compact for Migration that will feed into the IMRF has now been published, and it's been made available to member states and stakeholders. That report will be launched on the 16th of February in the presence of the President of the General Assembly, the Secretary General of the United Nations, as well as the coordinator of the UN Network on Migration. And without wanting to, apologies, could you just mute? Thank you. And without wanting to preempt any of those discussions during the launch, I would just like to highlight, as we sort of get ready to speak during this webinar, two specific recommendations. First of all, the one on the prevention or on preventing loss of life and other tragedies during migration, and this is very relevant to today's discussion ahead of Roundtable 2, and as well as the recommendation on the promotion of safe and regular migration and the need for states to uphold the right to proof of legal identity for all migrants. We very much hope that the report of the Secretary General will be an inspiration for many of you as you also prepare and further think through the pledges that you will potentially be making in the lead up and during the IMRF. So with this, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Damien Thoriot. I would also like to just note for everybody that this meeting is being recorded. So Damien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Azra. I would note first and foremost, I just want, before I get into my formal notes, I want to encourage this discussion space. Last time I looked, we were close to 300 participants. It's going to be difficult to give the space to everyone. And as such, I think it is key to make the most of that discussion space. Now, let me get back to my formal notes. Distinguished representatives from member states and civil society, esteemed partners and colleagues, on behalf of IOM, welcome to this second roundtable consultation in the lead up to the IMRF, which is co-hosted by UNODC and IOM. Allow me first to extend a special recognition to the members of the UN Network on Migration and its Secretariat for coordinating this dialogue. Today, we have the opportunity to discuss rights-based, practical, and action-oriented approaches to 7 of the GCM objectives. This includes access to proof of legal identity for all migrants, saving lives, I'm sorry, my notes keep on jumping, sorry, saving lives and establishing coordinated action on missing migrants, promoting alternatives to migration detention, managing borders in an integrated manner, coordinating responses to transnational crime. I will have to put my notes elsewhere, sorry. They keep on jumping whenever somebody comes in. So let me start again. Okay. Promoting alternatives to migration detention was a key element. Managing borders, coordinating our response to transnational crime is where I left off. And finally, promoting the safe and the dignified return, readmission, and sustainable reintegration of migrants. To ensure most of our time is devoted to the insights from our panelists and the discussion to follow, allow me to make a non-exhaustive overview of 5 topics related to the objective being discussed today, because this is covered by the draft background document prepared by the co-chair, which I'm sure you have all read. These 5 topics are the following. The first one is legal identity. It will be discussed today as a key enabler of rights and protection for people on the move. The proof of legal identity is key to migrant protection and has a foundational role in providing access to regular migration and fulfilling other GCM commitments. This goes along with strengthening the provision of adequate documentation to protect migrants and right-based approaches at borders and throughout the entire migration journey. The second topic is safe, dignified return, readmission, and sustainable reintegration of migrants, where, when we discuss this, the inherent complexity involves a varying and sometimes conflicting interests and priorities in national policies, public opinion, and international cooperation. In many countries, these issues have been the subject of intense political and public debate. Some states have decided to take steps to expand the access to safe and regular migration channels and to regularize the status of migrants. Others have attempted to increase the effectiveness of return, often under the assumption that increased return make for more effective migration policies and builds trust in the state's ability to manage its border. The third topic is the need to save lives, as Azra mentioned. A stark reminder that for many, migration is a risky endeavor. There is a moral, there is a humanitarian obligation to save lives and keep migrants out of harm's way. We need to identify the missing and the dead. We need to support the families of those who have gone missing or died after embarking upon migration journeys. And the restrictive migration policies and the lack of regular pathways push migrants to use dangerous transit routes. While search and rescue operations and provision of humanitarian assistance can definitely assist and save lives, they are often hindered by lack of political will. Against this backdrop, we have an opportunity to discuss innovative practices that have contributed to saving the lives of migrants, identify bottlenecks to search and rescue operations and related capacity development initiatives, along with the provision of life-saving humanitarian assistance. The fourth topic is combating trafficking in persons. Evidence indicates that a lack of viable migration options creates a market for irregular alternatives, whereby migrants can become highly vulnerable to exploitation. Those crossing the borders in search of safety opportunity, or to reunite with loved ones might accept dubious offers of employment, fall victim to false promises of traffickers, or find themselves stranded by smugglers. This was further exacerbated as part of the COVID-19 response when border crossings were closed. In many of these situations, even when identified as a probable victim of trafficking, authorities will often prioritize their immigration status, and the victim will be criminalized instead of protected. In turn, today's discussion will touch on practices to prioritize the protection of victims while strengthening efforts to prevent transnational crime. And finally, a fifth topic of paramount importance is alternatives to migration. Alternative to migration detention is a direct relevance when it comes to the rights of people on the move and migration governance. Looking at creative, innovative, and human rights-based solutions is crucial for the GCM implementation. Since the onset of the COVID-19, we have seen that effective alternatives to migration detention are possible, are viable, and lead to upholding the human rights of migrants. In sum, the objectives under review today focus on rights-based approach to ensure the fundamental rights of migrants, such as guaranteeing their legal or civil identity, offering protection, and improving the resources to mitigate risk throughout their journey. Now, more elements are covered in the discussion paper prepared to inform and assist member states and other relevant stakeholders for the roundtables and the policy debates. As such, let me conclude by reaffirming IOM's commitment to the ambitious vision set out by the GCM in supporting practical milestones for countries to embrace the opportunities, the diversity, the richness that people on the move and migration brings to our economies and our societies. Thank you for your attention. I pass the floor to my colleague from UNODC, who will moderate the next panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Damien, and I hope you can all hear me well. It's a pleasure of being with you today, and it's a pleasure also to join this flow with IOM that has been one of our long-standing partners. I would also like to congratulate the UN Migration Network for their work in preparing for the forum and all the work that they have done since their establishment, and they have really helped all of us make our efforts much more coordinated in supporting countries implement the Global Compact. Well, 2022 will be a key year. There will be a year where we're going to have the Migration Forum in May, but also it's a year that hopefully we will be coming out of the pandemic, a pandemic that has increased vulnerabilities, that has made people much more vulnerable to exploitation, and which has also made the efforts of countries to address these vulnerabilities much more difficult. We have we have 3 distinguished speakers with us today and a quite large number of participants. So I would not like to take any more time from this meeting today. I would kindly ask the experts to limit their contributions to around 7 minutes. And after these 3 experts, I will open the floor for discussion. And I would kindly ask participants to speak for no more than 2 or 3 minutes. I will be giving the names in order of priority, as it is given to me by the Secretariat of the Migration Network. And I will give the floor first to member states and then to civil society. Without further delay, I would now like to invite Mr. Felipe González Morales to take the floor. Before giving him the floor, just to remind everybody that Mr. Morales is the human rights, he has been appointed by the Human Rights Council in June 2017 as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants. He's the former president of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and he's a professor of international law at University Diego Portales in Santiago, Chile, and he's also honorific professor at University Carlos III of Madrid. Sir, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todas las personas e instituciones participando en esta consulta que es de mucha importancia para la implementación del Pacto Mundial sobre Migración. Quisiera partir mencionando que el fortalecimiento de las vías regulares es un eje temático transversal de los distintos objetivos del Pacto Mundial sobre Migración. Muchos de los problemas que existen para la protección de los derechos humanos de las personas migrantes derivan de la falta de cauces efectivos y amplios para una migración regular. Me referiré a los 4 objetivos que se me han planteado por los organizadores: salvar vidas, la gestión de fronteras, la detención migratoria y los regresos dignos. Primeramente, en relación con el objetivo 8 del pacto, salvar vidas y emprender iniciativas internacionales coordinadas sobre los migrantes desaparecidos. A la relatoría han llegado preocupantes informaciones y muy reiteradas sobre casos de muertes y desapariciones de migrantes, especialmente en el mar. Existe una necesidad imprescindible de que los estados asuman un rol activo al respecto y de que eviten las devoluciones en caliente o pushbacks que ponen en serio riesgo la vida o la integridad personal de las personas que migran. Existe también un deber de los estados de garantizar las labores humanitarias de rescate y salvamento y de no criminalizar a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil que las llevan a cabo. En este sentido, también respecto de este objetivo, es indispensable que los estados asuman a cabalidad su obligación de investigar las desapariciones de personas migrantes. Como una cuestión general del objetivo 8, quisiera resaltar lo que señala en su letra B. Cito: examinar los efectos de las políticas y leyes relacionadas con la migración para que no aumenten o creen el riesgo de que los migrantes desaparezcan. Se trata, en consecuencia, de una necesidad que se impone por el Pacto Mundial que va más allá de cuestiones específicas. Es evaluar toda la política migratoria de manera que no favorezca, sino que prevenga la desaparición de personas migrantes. Respecto del objetivo 11, sobre la gestión de fronteras integrada, segura y coordinada, quisiera enfatizar los siguientes aspectos. Primero, el respeto al derecho a buscar asilo y otras formas de protección internacional. Segundo, la prohibición de expulsiones colectivas. El respeto al principio de no devolución. El respeto a un debido proceso. La necesidad de establecer un sistema especial de recepción de niños y niñas migrantes. La necesidad de atender a las especificidades de las migrantes mujeres y asumir un enfoque de género en la gestión de las fronteras. La pandemia no puede servir como una excusa para el incumplimiento de estas obligaciones. Y en este sentido quisiera comentar que mi próximo informe sobre para el Consejo de Derechos Humanos se referiría precisamente a la gestión de fronteras, con uno de sus elementos centrales la cuestión de las devoluciones en caliente o pushbacks, dando seguimiento a un informe del año pasado al mismo Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Respecto del objetivo 13 sobre detención migratoria, esta debe ser empleada efectivamente como una medida de último recurso en el caso de la población migrante adulta y debe terminarse con la detención infantil migratoria, como lo señala el mismo pacto, y que se ha señalado que tal tipo de detención es contraria al derecho internacional por numerosos organismos internacionales de derechos humanos de Naciones Unidas y a nivel regional. Respecto de las alternativas a la detención, es importante mencionar que en muchos estados existen a menudo sistemas existentes desde antiguo, pero subutilizados. O sea, no es una falta de conocimiento de estas alternativas por parte de muchos estados, sino más bien una falta de voluntad política para emplearlos. Por ejemplo, la inserción comunitaria, el establecimiento de familias adoptivas, la firma o comparecencia regular y otras. También es importante, en relación con la cuestión de la detención migratoria, el acceso a la justicia y el debido proceso, y el que las condiciones de detención sean adecuadas y se permita un monitoreo independiente de organismos autónomos del Estado y de la sociedad civil así como de organismos internacionales, acerca de las condiciones de detención. En cuanto al objetivo 21, sobre retornos dignos, por una parte está la cuestión de los retornos voluntarios y no voluntarios, al que me referí en un informe al Consejo de Derechos Humanos hace 2 años, que es muy importante porque muchas veces pasan como voluntarios retornos que no son realmente tales. Está la cuestión de la mayor gravedad que adquieren los retornos en el contexto de pandemia. Está la cuestión de la deficiencia de la provisión de servicios públicos, que en el caso de la pandemia ha agudizado la situación de las personas migrantes y prácticamente las ha forzado en muchos casos a buscar retornar a sus países de origen. En este caso hay una responsabilidad del país de destino al respecto. También es importante señalar que los métodos mediante los cuales se llevan a cabo las deportaciones pueden estigmatizar a los migrantes. Por ejemplo, cuando se les da publicidad, por ejemplo, cuando se las asimila con personas condenadas por la comisión de delitos. Finalmente, respecto de este objetivo, quisiera resaltar que los acuerdos entre Estados respecto de retornos deben respetar los derechos humanos, el principio de no devolución, el derecho a buscar asilo y otros estándares internacionales. Para concluir, quisiera compartir una reflexión general. Si bien en los temas tratados hay aspectos técnicos envueltos, de manera más determinante lo que hay es una cuestión de voluntad política de los Estados. Voluntad política para asegurar que las políticas migratorias se rijan por los estándares de derechos humanos. En cada uno de los 4 temas que he tratado, resalta esto. A menudo no se trata de que los Estados no estén familiarizados con las buenas prácticas, sino que deliberadamente emprenden políticas migratorias regresivas. Esto queda claro cuando un Estado abandona políticas migratorias y buenas prácticas anteriores inspiradas en un enfoque de derechos humanos o no las utiliza o las subutiliza. Buenas prácticas preexistentes en el mismo Estado. Por lo mismo, el punto central no es tanto una cuestión de que los Estados necesiten aprender de buenas prácticas, que también es importante, pero no es lo central, sino de que tengan la voluntad política para emprender medidas migratorias respetuosas con los derechos humanos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for a very comprehensive overview of the challenges that we're facing in the protection of human rights in the migration flows. And I note in particular your concern about detention of child migrants, pushbacks, and forced returns. And I'm sure there will be probably a lot of interventions from the floor that would like to further dwell into these points. So thank you very much. And I would like now to return to actually a former colleague of ours, Mr. Helga Shuni. She's now, of course, an independent expert on trafficking in persons. She was also formerly the anti-trafficking coordinator in Israel. She holds an LLB from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and an MA in public administration from Harvard. Rahel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. As we all know, migration is complex. It's multifaceted. On the one hand, there's nothing that more reflects the sovereignty of states than migration policy. On the other hand, no one state can actually deal with migration alone because we live in a global community. The metaphor that to my mind drives this home is one of a meteorologist, which is very fitting because we now have snow in Jerusalem. Anyway, the metaphor is, can the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Brazil cause a tornado in Texas? And the answer is, sometimes in some complex causal situations, it can. And this drives home to me that any migration policy that a state formulates, whatever its aims, can have tremendous repercussions on global battles against trafficking and smuggling of migrants. I'd like to give you just a few examples. One example is deportation and detention. On the face of it, a state decides to speedily deport irregular migrants or to detain them until they're deported. The aim is to decrease the number of irregular migrants and to deter others from coming into the state. However, when we consider trafficking and smuggling of migrants, we realize that this can have tremendously adverse repercussions because it can cause us to not receive information about smuggling and trafficking routes, patterns, and actors. In addition, if we don't act to rehabilitate smuggled migrants and victims of trafficking, they do not undergo rehabilitation. We may meet them again as re-trafficked and re-smuggled. So here we see a policy which seems to have a very simple aim, but has repercussions. Another such policy, which is quite interesting, is many states have visa policies which encourage or facilitate the entry of foreign spouses of citizens. And of course, this seems to promote the aim of the human rights of the citizens. It's even anchored in various international human rights documents. However, it can actually have repercussions on the battles against trafficking and smuggling, because at least in one state, traffickers use this policy to marry victims and bring them into the country, and then there was absolutely no monitoring. So we see surprising things here, things that we think have one aim and are simple and are in the sovereignty of states can have tremendous repercussions. What are some best practices? Well, as a former coordinator, of course, one of the best practices that I think is important is coordination. And this fits in with the Global Compact's whole of government approach and whole of society approach. Only if you have a coordinating mechanism, which is going to try to see the full picture, okay? Only then can you truly formulate migration policies that will serve the interests of states and will serve global battles against trafficking and smuggling. You have to have not only the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, any relevant ministry. You have to have civil society, parliament, media, get the fullest picture. Hand in hand with that is to have broad-based training. Without broad-based training of all relevant actors, one can't pursue global battles. Everyone has to speak the same language. And here I want to put in a word for something that I have not seen done well anywhere, but I would hope from the floor, perhaps there would be some reaction. Cultural sensitivity training. Migrants come from different cultures. How can you possibly investigate, prosecute, and help them if you don't have cultural sensitivity training? You will not get your cooperation. You will not be able to help them. So that's one thing, coordination. The second thing is, of course, policies promoting the human rights of migrants. This is important not only for itself, but also because only if you promote the human rights of migrants are you going to get cooperation. Are you going to have the possibility of rehabilitation and thus not have them re-trafficked? And among these, of course, legal aid, medical care, non-criminalization is paramount. Non-criminalization of victims of trafficking and non-criminalization of smuggled migrants for being smuggled migrants. Not conditioning protections on cooperation with law enforcement. All these things are important for themselves. And they're also important in order to promote battles against pernicious phenomena like trafficking and smuggling of migrants. Now, Professor Gonzalez mentioned a cross-cutting issue, opening up regular pathways of migration. This is terribly important for any battle, any global battle against smuggling and trafficking of persons. And one of the best practices that I would recommend here is bilateral agreements among countries to which migrants migrate, which would address, among the rest, prohibition of high recruitment fees, which make migrants vulnerable to exploitation. So I don't know if I'm going beyond my time, but in conclusion, if I were called upon to recommend the most important policies or best practices for states in order to both consider their own interests in limiting irregular migration, but also pursue their interest in promoting the battle against trafficking and smuggling of migrants. First of all, the establishment of a coordinating mechanism with representation from government agencies and civil society, broad-based training being part of that. Secondly, open up regular pathways of migration, and especially bilateral agreements, also, of course, regional agreements would help. Thirdly, the human rights of migrants should be a central pillar of states' migration policies, both because this is the right thing to do and because it actually promotes global battles against pernicious phenomenon. And finally, something which I didn't actually mention before, standard operating procedures for the entire period from the entry of migrants and during their stay, so that they can be identified, whatever stage is being talked about, and clear, detailed, and referrals which will allow investigation, prosecution, and also helping the migrants. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Rahel. I mean, there was a lot of rich suggestions there. I mean, I know some which were also quite unusual, the cultural sensitivity trainings, you know, the bilateral agreements, and also others such as how can we better promote the cooperation with law enforcement without making it also a prerequisite for assistance and support. So thank you very much for this. I would like now to turn to our third speaker, Mr. Zoran Djokovic. Mr. Djokovic is an international specialist on civil registration and identity management. He has worked extensively with IOM, with UNICEF, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, UNESCAP, and others. He has more than 20 years of experience in assisting countries to improve the civil registration and identity management system. He has also a solid record of global research in the area of civil documentation and national legal identity systems. Mr. Djokovic, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, at the beginning, allow me to say a few words about the very concept. Been an interruption. I will switch on to, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well, Mr. Djokovic. It was my mistake because I left my microphone on. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, I'll start again. I will just start my presentation by shedding some light on the concept of legal identity. Just as a reminder, we all know that identity is an inherited right of every individual, but only when it's operationalized by a relevant state authority. That is the point when we say that identity is actually, that registered identity becomes a legal identity. For most of the population around the globe, a legal identity is operationalized and the documentary evidence is issued by a relevant authority at the point of birth, where different biographical information is collected on the document, birth certificate, which is then used to obtain a range of other documents. But we are also aware that legal identity gap revealed that there is around 1 billion large population around the globe that doesn't have a birth certificate or any form of proof of legal identity, in which case there have been a large international efforts to provide these individuals with ID so that they can have a proof of legal identity. But although I mentioned that identity is normally referred to as biographical information of an individual, there is also expanded aspect of legal identity, and that is that through the registration of identity information, some larger aspects of personal identity are being recorded that affect a number of rights of each individual, that is family relationship, then civil status, such as person being married or not being married. And for all of these, states operate quite elaborate systems, administrative systems, that cater for fulfilling of the rights of every individual, every citizen on their territory, so that every individual is provided with the documentary proof of legal identity. Now, what are the consequences? And this is what I believe is the main topic of these discussions today, is that what is the impact of legal identity in migratory context? And I would say that the impact can be threefold. First of all, I would like to highlight that in the context of global mobility, in order to leave any country or return to any country, given the existing border arrangements at all border crossings, without documentary proof of legal identity, normally in the format of a passport, travel document, it is pretty much impossible to leave the country and even to return into your own country. So in that sense, legal identity and operationalization of legal identity has huge ramifications on the global mobility as a whole. And in fact, for a large population, and I previously mentioned a World Bank estimate of 1 billion individuals across the globe without legal identity, the only way for them to cross the international borders of their state without being in a possession of the official proof of documentary evidence of their legal identity is to go in through irregular channels, which is obviously has quite significant implications in the context of migration. But equally, the issue of legal identity has significant impact on migration management of any given state, because they have to keep in operation quite an elaborate administrative framework to manage identities of migrants on their territory. And they have to do it not only when the migrants are actually at the destination in the country, but also before migrants actually arrive in the country, when they are in the process of application to reach their destination. There are a wide range of checks that migration authorities do through visa application processes, residence permit issuance processes, that implies verification of wide range of legal identity documents, where if the national legal identity systems that cater for the issuance of these documents are underdeveloped, means that for most of migrants, it would be impossible to obtain these documents, and they can go through different illegal channels to try to obtain fabricated documents, which then poses significant issue for destination country in the context of migration management. But let's say when the migrants are finally at their destination, at the destination country, this in particular affects their rights, because they find themselves, unlike nationals, those who always live in their own country, in a quite a peculiar situation. And that is that they have to reflect their vital events, their legal identity in two systems: in the system of the country where they come from, and in the system of the country where they reside as migrants, as resident migrants. So in case a child is born while the migrant is abroad, the state of origin would also expect that that event is reflected in the civil register in the country of origin. Otherwise, the authorities of the country of origin wouldn't know of the new individual and the legal identity of that new individual. Equally, for instance, if a person dies as a migrant abroad, there are quite a significant implications in terms of inheritance rights at the country of origin that cannot be processed unless there is a communication that such event has occurred from the civil register of the destination country with the country of origin and the legal identity system of that country. Equally, when migrants have their vital events such as birth of their baby or marriage in the country where they come from, the destination country where they reside as a migrant would want to reflect this event. And then there is usually quite an elaborate legal procedure that a migrant has to undergo in order to reflect that event in the legal identity system of the destination country. Right now, for most of the migrants, they can only resort to traveling back and forth between their country of origin and country of destination to reflect all these events so that everything is perfectly synchronized across the two different systems. And here I would like to highlight the importance of the consular services of the country of origin in order to provide all of these services to migrants at the country where they currently reside so that they don't have to travel back to their own country of origin in order to reflect all these events. There are particularly important aspects of legal identity when it comes to vulnerable migrants, victims of trafficking, victims of migrants smugglers, where at the destination country, they might often find themselves in the situation that they cannot provide any documentary evidence of their legal identity, which puts the destination country in a quite a peculiar position when it comes to putting them in a protection framework because they don't even know who they are. So there is usually a quite elaborate system put in place to reconstruct their legal identity and cater them with the relevant documentary proof of legal identity through the consular services and often with the assistance of IOM. So that they can enter protection schemes and go back to their country should they wish so. And finally, I would like to highlight one last important aspect, and that is the aspect of irregular migrants on the territory of any given country. And that is the issue that often migrants are reluctant to report to the authorities of the country where they currently reside, in the fear of deportation. And there is and any knowledge of national authorities of having them being present on the territory, they may deem to be a risk in terms of their own well-being. However, that has quite far-reaching repercussions in terms of ensuring some other very important rights. So for instance, migrants, irregular migrants that the host state has no knowledge of and they don't have link with the national administrative system will often have no opportunity to legally register their marriage with their own national or national of the host state. If they have a baby born on the territory of the state where they don't have a link with the authorities of the state where they reside, the baby born in wedlock or out of wedlock, if not registered, will have significant problems later on in life because there is no record of legal identity. And finally, if a person dies and the authorities fail to reflect this event, there is no proof that event ever happened, which may have significant consequences in terms of inheritance rights of the family members back in the country of origin of such a person. So with that, I would like to conclude. This is just a short overview of how legal identity affects migration and migrants in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Djokovic, for your views on I have to admit, on a fascinating subject. And also the figures that you mentioned, the 1 billion people, 1 in 7 people on this earth do not have legal identity. This is, it's beyond the description. Thank you very much also for noting the importance of certain services like consular services, which of course are very important in any kind of effort to address migration, but also in particular to this issue. So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions from the floor. We have now concluded with the intervention, with the presentation from our 3 distinguished speakers, and I would like to kindly ask you to put your questions in the box, or basically ask the floor from the chat box. I will not be able to give you the floor by raising hands because it's a very big group and I cannot really manage a discussion through this means. So kindly send your questions in the chat box so I can ask the speakers or ask the floor to intervene. And I have already 3 requests from intervention. And this is from the Permanent Mission of Thailand in Geneva, the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh in Geneva again, and from the European Union's DG Home. So I would like to start from the Permanent Mission of Thailand, Ms. Chompunut. I apologize if I mispronounce names, it's a bit difficult. Thank you. Ms. Chompunut, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you very well. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thanks so much. So to save the time, so let me start by to share some of our lesson learned in brief regarding the objective 13, the use of alternative to detention. So for us, for Thailand, the key ingredients are first and foremost political will, which is pretty much echo what the SR on human rights of migrants just mentioned earlier. The political will get the ball rolling. Moreover, state must work with stakeholders. Thus, the whole government approach and the whole society approach is very critical. And last but not least, the best interest of the child must always be placed at the center of any decision or consideration. Of course, this is a work in progress, and Thailand will continue to pursue the use of alternative to detention and continue to try to do our best. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, and also thank you for really staying within the time limits. I appreciate that very much. I would like now to go to the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh in Geneva, and kindly ask Mr. Bakubila to take the floor.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor. I also thanks the distinguished delegates, distinguished panelists for their insightful deliberations. Our government has introduced smart cards for all our overseas workers to facilitate their mobility, stay, and other rights and facilities, both in Bangladesh and destination countries. Among other challenges, migrant workers, particularly those in the informal sectors, often face difficulties in case of receiving work permit documents or other legal documents. We suggest that the roundtable produces specific recommendations for addressing these challenges more effectively. A human rights-based and humanitarian approach to smuggled migrants is yet to be fully achieved in many parts of the world. While we have to look forward to devising more coordinated actions to respond to the human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, it is essential to ensure that smuggled migrants are nowhere criminalized. It is necessary to address this issue with an equal focus on preventive and remedial measures. The GCM identified that facilitating regular migration pathways is a crucial preemptive step. However, mainstreaming this measure in the policies and actions related to the trafficking and smuggling of migrants has not been achieved. We hope the roundtable will place due attention to this missing link. The COVID-19 has redefined our approach to border management. Objective 11 of the GCM has already stipulated some practical actions for border management and facilitating regular migration. It is now necessary to put new challenges in the framework of the GCM and find solution to them. Throughout our recovery efforts and beyond, migrants must remain an integral part of the country's recovery plans and programs. We hope the roundtable would stimulate in-depth discussions in the forum for finding a comprehensive solution to the crisis with a particular focus on the impending obstacles to the migratory movement. One immediate requirement is to ensure universal acceptance of vaccine certificates or relevant documents. We would like to see that the review forum guides some practical solutions for effective border management and human mobility in the context of global crises and emergencies. The roundtable document should be reflective of these issues. The vulnerability of migrant workers has been redoubled during the pandemic. Millions of them have returned to their countries of origin. Likewise, we have received a large number of our migrant workers. In the face of this crisis, our government has introduced cash support, soft loans, and skilling and upskilling programs for the returning migrants. In the pre-COVID context, cooperation in the field of return, readmission, and reintegration primarily focused on migrants in irregular situations. However, we have seen the large-scale return of regular migrant workers losing their livelihood opportunities. Addressing the challenge of this nature requires a broader cooperation. This should focus on creating pathways for reinstating the returning migrants in the workforce when we get back to normalcy, and where it is impossible to ensure adequate compensation for them. Meaningful involvement of the private sector is critical in this regard. We would like to see that the roundtable generates some action-oriented guidelines for such cooperation. Finally, we take a positive view of Ms. Garshuni's idea of SOP for the whole migration cycle, putting rights and protection of migrants at the center. I thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your intervention. And I would like now to go to the European Union DG Home, and it's Ms. Eniko Chontos, who have asked for the floor.
Thank you very much for the floor. I speak today on behalf of the European Commission and the European External Action Service. First of all, let me thank you for all the work being done in the road to the International Migration Review Forum. For us, it's important to take stock of progress and formulate recommendations. And today I will very briefly try to give you information about the work we have been doing in the EU. So regarding the GCM objectives discussed today, first of all, saving lives remains the #1 priority for the EU. The continued high number of deaths on migratory routes towards the EU calls for us for further action and develop a common European approach to saving lives. Cross-border operational cooperation and timely information sharing are crucial, as it was said several times already today. Inside the EU, we have created the European Contact Group on Search and Rescue for that purpose. We have also been stepping up cooperation with partner countries in this area, for example, under the Joint Valletta Action Plan.
Dans le cadre d'un plan d'action conjoint entre le grupo de trabajo con Libia. En segundo lugar,
ثانيا لتعزيز الاستجابة الدولية السريعة للاتجار بالأشخاص وتهريب الأشخاص.
Documents, one EU action plan against migrant smuggling for the upcoming years, and another document, a new strategy on combating trafficking in human beings. The first one aims at strengthening our actions to counter smuggling by setting up operational partnerships with partner countries, by protecting the fundamental rights of migrants, by improving EU rules on sanctioning smugglers and employers, and also on inspections, and by addressing new challenges, such as the instrumentalization of migrants for political purposes. The new strategy on combating trafficking in human beings has a comprehensive response and focuses on key priorities, such as reducing demand, breaking the criminal model, protecting and empowering victims, and cooperation with partners internationally. Of course, promoting regular pathways remains also an important objective of our Pact on Migration and Asylum. Regarding detention, the safeguards provided for children and vulnerable persons in the EU legislation are of primary consideration for competent authorities in the EU, including where detention has to be applied. EU legislation foresees that children should only be detained as a last resort and when the conditions defined by EU law are met, and only where no effective alternatives to detention should be applied. Further safeguards apply for minors regarding specially designed facilities and the principle of family unity, which must be respected. Finally, regarding safe, dignified, and effective returns, readmission, and sustainable reintegration, these are important elements of the comprehensive EU approach to migration. We strive to improve both our internal procedures as well as cooperation with partners, which COVID-19 has rendered often difficult. We believe that agreed procedures are an effective tool for enhancing readmission cooperation. In April last year, the Commission adopted an EU strategy on voluntary return and reintegration to improve the quality and impact of EU and national programs in this field and establish better links with development initiatives to ensure sustainable reintegration. Our work addresses returns from the EU, but also support for return from transit countries to countries of origin. An important example of the latter is the EU-IOM Joint Initiative for Migrant Protection and Reintegration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Madam. And I would like to, before I go to the next request from the floor, I would very much appreciate when you request the floor, if you can state who you represent. That would be very useful to me. And I would also like to say that we need to close on the hour because it's a platform with interpretation, so we cannot exceed. So we really have to close on the time. If there are if there are still requests for the floor that are not able to satisfy, please send me your questions and we'll address them to the speakers. Or we will discuss with the Migration Network how to get back to you on some of the issues that you will be raising. I would now like to go to El Salvador. I have asked for the floor, and I would appreciate if you could state your name and your function. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
De El Salvador, misión permanente ante Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias a los panelistas por la información compartida. El Salvador agradece la oportunidad de participar en esta mesa redonda y confirmamos nuestro rol y compromiso como país campeón en el marco de la implementación del Pacto Mundial para una migración segura, ordenada y regular. El Salvador considera que los procesos de movilidad humana requieren de enfoques y soluciones globales, en la que los estados suman responsabilidades compartidas en reconocimiento, respeto y protección de derechos humanos de la población migrante. Es así que nuestro país apuesta por la creación de condiciones adecuadas para que la población salvadoreña viva en el país, haciendo que la migración regular sea una opción mientras se mitigan las posibles condiciones de expulsión que vienen acompañadas de la migración irregular. Igualmente, el trabajo con la diáspora y los que vuelven a nuestro país es una de las prioridades del gobierno. Así, los esfuerzos por facilitar la identidad y documentación de acuerdo con el objetivo 4, tanto de los salvadoreños como de otros migrantes de otras nacionalidades, se hace efectivo mediante procesos de carnetización y aplicación de la Ley Especial de Migración y Extranjería del año 2019, que permite la implementación de un sistema de registro electrónico que ha aligerado y garantizado un mejor control de las entradas y salidas en nuestro territorio. De igual forma, esta ley ha permitido la aplicación de procesos administrativos abreviados que permiten una gestión de la migración más adecuada, reduciendo tiempos administrativos para la resolución de casos de ingresos irregulares en nuestro territorio. No menos importante, El Salvador está comprometido con la búsqueda de personas desaparecidas, en línea con el objetivo 8, para lo cual está fortaleciendo las capacidades institucionales para la coordinación eficiente y efectiva del manejo de información en el marco de los procesos de búsqueda, así como para la identificación adecuada y entrega de personas fallecidas localizadas. Asimismo, nuestro gobierno, de forma conjunta con el Sistema de Naciones Unidas, se trabaja para facilitar asistencia en procesos de atención y reintegración de personas migrantes en condición de retorno asistido, en coordinación con nuestros consulados, embajadas, autoridades migratorias correspondientes y con la Dirección General de Migración y Extranjería, para que las personas que buscan retornar a sus países de origen puedan hacerlo de manera segura y regular, en línea con nuestro plan de gobierno. Asimismo, para los casos de retorno no voluntario, como parte de la estrategia de reintegración, se brinda acompañamiento a través de ventanillas de atención a nivel local. Asimismo, comprometidos con mantener un enfoque de género en todos estos procesos, se busca brindar una atención diferenciada a todas las mujeres retornadas. En ese sentido, contamos con ventanillas especializadas para atender a las mujeres retornadas y un protocolo de atención a mujeres migrantes retornadas. Para finalizar, deseamos reafirmar la necesidad de que el proceso de implementación del Pacto de Migración siga contando con apoyo de la cooperación internacional, así como el fortalecimiento de capacidades y alianzas estratégicas. En ese sentido, agradecemos el apoyo de la Unión Europea con el proyecto Creación de Alianzas para la Migración, que fortalecerá las capacidades institucionales pertinentes para mejorar la gobernanza migratoria e implementación del Pacto de Migración de forma conjunta con la Red de Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Soto, for your intervention. And now have Mexico, but after this is the last country representative that I have on my list. Then after Mexico, we're gonna go to civil society, and I have Kuwait's Trade Union Federation, Churches Witnessing with Migrants, and the Academic Council of the United Nations System for the moment. So, sir, Mexico has the floor. Sir, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor moderador. Jorge González, de la Misión Permanente de México en Ginebra. Quiero iniciar agradeciendo a la organización de este diálogo y también aprovechar para dar la bienvenida a la publicación del informe del secretario general. En relación a los objetivos del pacto que hoy se discuten, quisiera compartir los siguientes avances y desafíos. Iniciando con el objetivo 4, hemos fortalecido los servicios de documentación que México ofrece a las personas mexicanas a través de la red consular. El objetivo es asegurar la expedición oportuna del pasaporte, la matrícula consular y la credencial para votar a quienes la soliciten y cumplan con sus requisitos. Además de ser este un medio de identificación, estos documentos que mencioné permiten el acceso a servicios, facilitan el reconocimiento de derechos y empoderan a la persona migrante. En cuanto al objetivo 8, compartimos que a partir de la aprobación de la Ley General de Desaparición Forzada de 2017, se han puesto en marcha mecanismos y protocolos para la búsqueda de migrantes desaparecidos que enfatizan la importancia del acceso a la justicia, la atención a víctimas y la sistematización de datos. Un ámbito que debe seguirse fortaleciendo es la capacitación de las instituciones articuladoras de estas medidas. México también cuenta con un centro de información y asistencia a mexicanos en Estados Unidos, a través del cual se coordinan los esfuerzos de las autoridades de ambos países y la sociedad civil para la localización de migrantes extraviados y la recuperación de restos de migrantes fallecidos. Respecto a los objetivos 9 y 10, relacionados con la respuesta transnacional al tráfico de migrantes y el combate a la trata de personas, México ha impulsado la capacitación en estas materias de más de 1,600 funcionarios del Instituto Nacional de Migración y ha desarrollado protocolos para facilitar la identificación y asistencia de las víctimas. Estos esfuerzos se realizan en alianza con la OIM, la Oficina de la ONU contra la Droga y el Delito y la sociedad civil. En cuanto al objetivo 11, relativo a la gestión de las fronteras, México ha impulsado distintos esquemas de coordinación con Centroamérica, más recientemente para dar atención integral a los movimientos inusuales de migrantes desde estos países. El objetivo de estos esfuerzos es lograr el ordenamiento de los flujos migratorios, asegurar la identificación en frontera de las personas en situación de vulnerabilidad y facilitar el acceso de las mismas a la asistencia con enfoque de derechos humanos. Finalmente, en lo que se refiere al objetivo 13, compartimos que en 2020 se aprobaron reformas a la ley de migración en las que se plantea la no detención de las niñas migrantes, convencidos de que la detención no abona a su interés superior. En conjunto con ACNUR, pusimos en marcha un programa de alternativas al alojamiento para solicitantes de la condición de refugiado que haga posible que la detención migratoria sea una medida acotada y sujeta a estándares mínimos. Aunque aún incipiente, el programa ha beneficiado a 1,400 personas y debe seguirse fortaleciendo a través de alianzas efectivas con sociedad civil. Para terminar, simplemente deseo señalar que como fenómeno transnacional, la migración requiere del esfuerzo conjunto de los países de origen, tránsito, destino y retorno de migrantes a fin de ser gestionada de manera favorable. Esperamos que esta visión, que está sustentada en la responsabilidad compartida, se vea reflejada en el Foro de Examen de la Migración Internacional y a lo largo de sus actividades preparatorias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mexico. And I've seen also that the permanent mission of the Philippines has asked for the floor. You have the floor, madam.
Good afternoon. Just to note that combating trafficking in persons is a core Philippine advocacy These tasks require global coordination, and only the dedication of all countries involved, origin, transit, and destination, can bring about meaningful changes. So what we can do, we can enhance information sharing, adopt human rights-based approach, continue to exchange best practices. We are not starting from scratch. We have various fora, including the Group of Friends United Against Human Trafficking. So what our roundtable in the IMRF can focus on can be to perhaps how to scale up these efforts on combating trafficking. We support continued discussions on Objective 10. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir, for your intervention. I would now like to go to Kuwait, to the Trade Union Federation. Mr. Mohammed Al-Arada, you have the floor.
شكرا أخ الرئيس، وشكرا على الدعوة الكريمة للمشاركة في هذا المنتدى الكبير.
Participate to this very important forum. From the outset, the Federation of the Union of Kuwait is actually requesting to keep the Al-Kafil system, and also requesting the different governments to ratify the different international conventions about migration. And we need also to raise awareness among the different workers, as we have done in the IOM, and this is through the national program for in awareness, and we have organized about 21 workshops, and we have informed workers about their rights and obligations, and also to disseminate the social awareness and to inform that these workers are part and parcel of our society. And we have also informed the labor about these laws, and this is actually to the other countries. And we have also informed about the necessity of building strong partnerships between the different unions and international organizations, and the necessity to sign and to execute different treaties between different unions. And we have signed more than 20 treaties with India, Nepal, Philippines, and Egypt and Sudan. And in the end, it is necessary to encourage the different migrant workers to be part of these unions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir. And I would like also to express my appreciation for everybody's effort to stay within the 3 minutes. So this is very appreciated. We still have 10 minutes more before I give the floor to the closing remarks. And I have on my list the Academic Council of the United Nations System and the Churches Witnessing with Migrants. So I would like to give the floor first to the Academic Council of the United Nations System.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jill Goldenzeal. I'm here representing the Academic Council on the UN system. My views are my own. I want to express that the Secretary General's note for a call to action for the next 4 years before the next IMRF is really a call for more data. And I've seen in the chat here, and particularly for Roundtable 1, a call for more specificity that I interpret also as a call for more data from the stakeholders here today. Academics are trained in getting data, and we're trained in program evaluation and are specifically poised to help in this area. But regardless of whether we do it or not, it needs to be done. And I just want to highlight today in my intervention a few areas that came up today where I see this as being especially important. First of all, we don't have data on the best practices that are out there. They've just been best practices that have been happening since the Global Compact for Migration was enacted haven't been around for very long. And there's a lot of innovation that the COVID-19 pandemic has forced, for better and for worse, that we don't have data on, and we don't have program evaluation on to figure out how those can apply or not, how those innovations can be carried forward or not in what I hope will be a post-pandemic world very soon. So we need much more evaluation on that to make sure we're carrying the very best practices into the future. Second, we need better data on labor impact, labor migration, how changes in immigration policies, migration policies throughout the world have impacted labor markets during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then what to do about it. As the Secretary General's report highlighted, the role of migrants as frontline workers and domestic workers and in other sectors of the economy throughout the world has really been acutely highlighted by this pandemic. So this actually presents an opportunity for stakeholder cooperation to highlight the positive impact of migration and how to improve policies to alleviate these labor shortages that have affected all of us should another pandemic come about, and really in general. And third, I really want to echo Ms. Gershuni's excellent comments on the relationship between transnational crime and human rights and the need to improve dialogue between practitioners of both. Practitioners of law enforcement, militaries aren't always trained in human rights, and vice versa. Human rights advocates aren't trained in law enforcement. Some groups get more than one would think, a tremendous amount, but a lot of them are siloed in their training. And we really need more data on best practices on how to get these groups talking to each other better, more fora for discussion and cooperation, and an understanding of how to scale those best practices all over the world. Academics are poised to help with this. I know that many academics in the Academic Council, I can't speak for all of them, but many would stand willing and able to help with it. And I look forward to continuing discussions with the UNNM Secretariat and others on how migrations can get this crucial data, evaluate programs in order to ensure that the global compact just keeps getting better going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this intervention. And I would like now to give the floor to Churches Witnessing with Migrants. So if you can please state your name. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Snap Mabanta from the Philippines. Our network, Churches Witnessing with Migrants, involves faith-based organizations, migrant-serving institutions, and most especially valuable, the grassroots migrants. We held the national consultation towards the last quarter of 2021 in dialogue with displaced and distressed Filipino migrant workers. And in relation to the GCM objectives discussed today, here are some of the findings that we wish to share. Deep poverty in our country is still the driving force why forced migration thrives. There's really no clear and systematic plan on the part of the Philippine government for long-term job creation, and in fact has heavily relied on migration that has not brought about genuine economic development in our country. The assistance to migrant workers affected by the pandemic provided by our government is so dismal and inaccessible to many. While we recognize that there is a government response to those affected, there is still much to be done in order for this program to reach majority of affected migrant workers. Human trafficking thrives especially in the poorest areas of the country, and young Muslim women from Mindanao, the southern part of the Philippines, have been targeted as victims. Needless to say, Filipinos still remain to be highly vulnerable to illegal recruitment and trafficking. They are trapped between surviving on a daily basis and finding jobs in any way they can. Moreover, the Philippine government heavily deregulates the recruitment and deployment practices of private recruitment agencies. Recently, our network assisted 52 Filipino women trafficked to Syria, most of them with fake documents, it revealed the gross connections and connivance of recruitment agencies, Bureau of Immigration officials, and airport employees to deploy Filipino women for non-existent jobs abroad or exploited further. We are grateful to the Philippine Senate Committee on Women for starting the investigation. We also commend the Philippine Embassy in Syria for facilitating the repatriation of the women victims. But the truth remains, trafficking continues to thrive because of the involvement of some government officials and the lack of a concrete plan to strengthen protection for our most vulnerable, to end forced migration and create jobs locally through national industries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And I would like now to give the floor to the South Asian Council of Trade Unions. You have the floor. Can you hear me? The South Asian Council of Trade Unions is under Laxman Basnet in the screen, on screen. Okay, then if the South Asian Council of Trade Unions is not available, I would like to go to Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants.
Thank you. I already shared some points on the chat box, but I just want us to acknowledge the problem of education trafficking, in which many hopeful youth fall victim to international education agencies and find themselves studying in profit-driven colleges, but with low quality education or worse, fake schools. They get to be exploited by employers and with their visa status are not regarded as labor cases. Our partner organizations like the Union Network of Migrants in New Zealand have documented and developed steps to address gross exploitation of migrant students by employers and agencies, as well as the issue of education trafficking. I do hope that we get to address this issue as well, because no one is illegal and no one wants to be undocumented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have time for one more NGO. And I would like to ask the NGO Committee on Migration. Take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm John Bingham with the NGO Committee on Migration. We have colleagues online from Europe, from the United States, and Asia as well. As we speak, there's a search underway in the Caribbean for some 39 migrants that were on a boat with 40 that capsized yesterday. One survivor. We know in November, a boat packed with migrants capsized in the English Channel, or the English Channel Cemetery, the Caribbean Cemetery, and other cemeteries that see boats going down all the time. And as we speak, people drowning or lost at sea. So this conversation is super important. We find also that the solution that's recommended in the paper and in the presentations across all of the objectives, or nearly all of the objectives of increasing regular pathways and regularization, is the most effective solution, practical, real, and with many examples that we would cite from civil society. Many examples we're a part of. In Venezuela, the regularization program for something close to 1 million Venezuelans is remarkable. In the United States, the temporary protection status for migrants from Haiti, from Venezuela, from so many other countries, that gives regular possibilities for residence and work to migrants who otherwise would be outside the system, subject to detention and deportation, and vulnerability in every direction. In France, the regularization of some 12,000 migrants this past year, who work in a range of essential services, not just doctors and nurses, all very clear examples of regular pathways, regularization as a solution. We recognize for political will the leadership of Mexico and Morocco at the Global Forum, and the leadership of the Global Forum itself at looking at practical solutions for migrants in vulnerable situations, for migrant workers, solutions that include regularization and regular pathways. And last, when we talk about return and reintegration, and we use the word sustainability, we have to look at the very current and very painful situation of migrant workers who have returned either voluntarily or involuntarily from jobs where they worked, where they were promised wages, often under contracts, and they've not been paid those wages. So unpaid wages, wage theft as the opposite of sustainable return or decent return and reintegration. We talk about the importance of wages for remittances and development. When we see unpaid wages, we see missing remittances, missing rights, missing dignity, And it's not only the migrants and the families that lose, it's their communities and their countries of origin. So solutions are there, multilateral coordination and cooperation is needed with civil society in it all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to give the floor to Fambaye Karis in Senegal.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, but the speaker has just turned our microphone off. So we have no microphone there.
Madame, on a un problème avec les sons, on vous attend pas.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. I am coordinating the trade union action here with migrants in Senegal. So we carry out a series of activities in order to protect the rights of migrants and also to increase their level of training. Unfortunately, with COVID, we know that a lot of migrants have been forced to return home. And I think it makes sense to really look into the dignity of returnees. It's been mentioned, but I wanted to repeat that today. From a trade union perspective, I want to insist on the fact that we are facing difficulties ourselves. We have a role which is to monitor the situation of workers and to follow up on the fate of people who have been forced to return home. Unfortunately, this is a difficult job to do, and it's important for us, I think, to be in closer connection with other trade union organizations in other countries so as to be able to see exactly what is happening with migrants who have returned home. We are told that some migrants have gone back home and have created some sort of income generating activity, but we know from a fact that in many cases those projects fail due to insufficient preparation, due to the lack of training or the lack of capacity. And all those projects tend to fail in many cases. And this is a very real issue that we see in the field. I also want to insist on the link that exists between trafficking and the vulnerability of migrants and the lack of access to regular pathways. People do use irregular pathways for many reasons. They often do not have proper documentation. Without proper documentation, even if you want to, you do not have access to regular migration pathways. And we need to think at this whole issue holistically because everything there is very much interconnected. I also want to talk about data that someone mentioned earlier. I think indeed we need data, and we certainly need data on irregular migration. If you collect data in the airports or at embassy level, you only have a partial view of the reality out there. So I think we have a lot of statistics that are available to us, a lot of data, yes, but that is not truthful, I would say, or does not reflect the reality out there. We should try to really gather more data on irregular migration pathways in order to truly understand what is happening in the field. And then finally, we're talking about the end of the COVID-19 crisis maybe, or the relaunching of our economies. Within that framework, I do believe that it's important to think about the role that migrant workers will play. A lot of those migrant workers are, in Africa at least, working in informal economy. They should be given more chance to participate to the formal economy, because we will need them to relaunch our economies and to move away from the crisis and to help them move away from precariousness. Now, I don't want to be too long given the time, but these are a few reflections and comments that I wanted to share with you. And just to finish off, I wanted to thank my comrade Mohammed for his intervention earlier. And I think I want to encourage you, Mohammed, to review the legislation of your country. The kafala system needs to be reviewed sometimes. I think people fall into situations that are, I would say, unacceptable sometimes. You have domestic workers who basically sometimes have to run away, but run away and find themselves undocumented on the street without documents because those documents have been taken away from them when they arrived. And again, thank you very much. And thank you for the work that you've done, and particularly the network on UN migration. Thank you.
Merci, Madame, for votre intervention. Unfortunately, I'm in a difficult situation because I still have a number of speakers that have asked for the floor, but we really need to conclude. And I also have 3 distinguished speakers that I would really like to have the possibility to give the floor back for some concluding remarks. But unfortunately, we're hard pressed by time. The Migration Network told me that there will be a discussion space available on their website. So I highly encourage you to use that space to put on your thoughts and the work of your NGOs. And I kindly ask, I think the UN Migration Network just shared the link now on the chat box. I would now allow to move to the closing part of this event, and I would like to go to Mr. John Brandolino, Director at the UNODC's Division for Treaty Affairs, for his closing remarks. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Elias. I hope everyone can see and hear me. And thanks to everyone who joined today's dialogue and shared their thoughts on how to improve our joint capacity to advance safe, orderly, and regular migration, but in a way that leaves no room for human traffickers and migrant smugglers. The active participation today of a range of stakeholders, member states, non-governmental actors, academia, is a testimony to the timeliness of the process, particularly as migration is fueled by the pandemic and by high levels of unemployment, poverty, corruption, political strife, climate change, and violence, among other things. And it's also a testament to the fact that multilateralism, but also multi-sectoral coordination and cooperation remains key to discussing matters and addressing matters like migration and the regularization of migration, which require multi-pronged cooperative responses across borders and different sectors of society. And the pandemic has created fertile ground for crime to flourish, with criminals exploiting the COVID-19 socioeconomic crisis and to prey upon the most marginalized and impoverished, which of course includes migrants. And it's no surprise that the 2020 UNODC Global Report on Trafficking in Persons reveals that at least half of the traffic victims identified globally were targeted because of their economic needs. And the trafficking routes very much seem to mirror migration routes. Factors I mentioned that fuel displacement also fuel a disproportionate amount of vulnerability to trafficking, including for returnees who are not assisted and protected, as well as vulnerability to aggravated forms of migrant smuggling. So we're seeing the pandemic also having a significant impact, not only on the crime and victims, but also on responses to this crime, because responses are often hindered or need to be adapted. So today, given this background and given the discussion, I think the participants reconfirm the commitment to work together to pursue the relevant objectives relating to the trafficking and migrant smuggling that are set in the Global Compact on Migration. And echoing the text of the compact, it is crucial that the challenges and opportunities of international migration unite us rather than divide us. The Global Compact remains important as it provides a holistic approach to human mobility and seeks to advance cooperation of global, regional, and local levels between a variety of critical stakeholders, further promoting horizontal and vertical policy coherence among all sectors and levels of government. And in this context, I'll also mention the importance of the Vienna-based intergovernmental processes on countering organized crime, including the Commissions on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, and its subsidiary bodies, all the review mechanisms related to that, the Trafficking in Persons Working Group, Migrant Smuggling Working Groups, all to strengthen the policy coherence on safe and orderly migration through responses to human trafficking and migrant smuggling. The Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund can also be eyed as a vehicle to possibly promote international cooperation through effective support to delivery of services directly linked to the implementation of the compact, and pledges to the trust fund were encouraged today to help build momentum to the compact's implementation. And we, of course, will have the opportunity to further today's interesting discussions at the forthcoming International Migration Review Forum in May. This is a preparation, but that will be a big event for all these views to come together once again. We'll also have the opportunity to finalize a forward-looking progress declaration, which will lead our joint efforts on migration policy for the coming 4 years. And this forum will also be finally an occasion to reaffirm our commitment to place individuals at the core of our efforts to recall the international human rights law as a basis for the global compact. So I'll close by reiterating my organization's, UNODC's, commitment in working with partners to continue providing effective support to member states in the implementation of the global compact for migration, and our commitments to leading the agenda on countering trafficking in persons and migrant smuggling and advancing the broader migration policy framework of the compact. Thank you for the opportunities to close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. And I would now like to return to IOM and give the floor to Ms. Monica Goraci. She is the Director of the Migration Management Department. Ms. Goraci, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me and see me. Allow me to join my UNODC colleague, Mr. Brandolino, and all the panelists and colleagues from the UN Network on Migration, and thanking all of you for participating in today's roundtable discussion. As we approach IMRF, these discussions will really enable us to take advantage of this very important collective moment in international migration and the importance of international cooperation for well-functioning migration systems and the protection of migrants, women, men, boys, and girls is a tenet of the GCM, of the Global Compact on Migration, that is reaffirmed by today's discussion. As we reflect on the long list of challenges, I believe we should not lose sight also of the opportunities within reach. And in that spirit, allow me to make a few comments on each of the topics discussed, starting with legal identity, protection, and missing migrants. I am pleased to be part of the UN Legal Identity Task Force, together with the 13 UN agencies, and the insights shared today on ways to expand legal identity are really useful resources to prepare for IMRF. On missing migrants, the continuing and growing loss of lives during migration journeys can clearly not be normalized. In 2021, the numbers of death and disappearances increased on many migration routes across the world, as was acknowledged in the discussion. And while governments' efforts on search and rescue and provision of humanitarian assistance to save lives and assist the families of those who have died and gone missing are acknowledged and are encouraged and are fundamental, we also need to look behind the surface and collectively reflect on what pushes migrants to take such dangerous routes and means in the first place. As stressed by the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, first point on strengthening regular pathways is a cross-cutting and strategic aspect of the GCM, and we should thus really explore ways on delivering on that commitment to enhance availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration. This is also expressed clearly in the Secretary General's reports, where it says states are urged to assess the consequences of restrictive deterrence-based migration-related laws, policies, and practices. So let's use the opportunity of the IMRF to make commitments and pledges to decrease the number of missing migrants in 2022 and to increase the number of regular pathways, giving migrants safe access. The second point was combating trafficking in persons in the context of international migration. As we can see from recent and current events across the globe, including the ongoing pandemic, there remain serious challenges in the efforts to tackle trafficking and exploitations. We need more international cooperation to conduct investigations, We need to harmonize interpretations of the definition of human trafficking, and we need to provide more comprehensive person-centered support for trafficked migrants. But we also see many cooperative agreements and even transnational reform mechanisms that are starting to take form. So here too, we must go beyond being reactive and examine what makes people resort to traffickers and become more vulnerable, and ask ourselves, what more can be done collectively to address inequalities? What more can be done to grant access to safe pathways for people entitled to protection, such as victims of trafficking? And again, bold pledges and commitments are needed in the framework of international cooperation. And the third point, promotes safe and dignified return, readmission, and sustainable reintegration of migrants. The return, readmission, and reintegration of migrants has ceased to be the concern of only a limited number of countries or regions, and has become a policy priority for the migration governance and development strategies for many governments worldwide. And while a significant number of states should be commended for offering migrants return and reintegration assistance on the basis of free and prior and informed consent, return and reintegration processes continue sometimes to be delinked. Reintegration support is seldom linked to development efforts, for instance. In fact, it is often insufficient to address the specific rights and needs of migrants and their communities. And the gap on international cooperation on readmission also persists, which poses a risk for safe and dignified return. And once again, international cooperation is key for success here. The responsibility for sustainable reintegration doesn't lie only on one side. It lies in the hands of all actors involved, both at the sending and at the receiving end. So linking sustainable reintegration to local development agendas, for instance, should be a priority undertaking for these actors jointly. So also here, what are the commitments we can come up with to enhance shared responsibility so that returns are safe and dignified and reintegration is really sustainable and enables to make a living once returned? So to conclude, by identifying good practices in responding to these issues, we should have today, after the discussion, also a better knowledge of what is at our disposal, and we also have a better understanding of the gap. So we therefore would like to encourage you to participate in the UN Network on Migration's pledging initiative. Between now and the IMRF, think about what pledges can make the real difference. What are the commitments that will enable us to effectively address all these issues? How can we come up with concrete proposals that, as Mr. Bardolino said, will get us to this forward-looking progress declaration guiding our migration work for the coming 4 years? IMRF is ultimately not the end point of our journey, but the starting point. So once again, on behalf of IOM and UNODC, I'd like to thank you all for your participation in today's roundtable and for sharing your views for the fulfillment of those key objectives towards safe, orderly, and regular migration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Doraz, for your remarks. And from my side, as moderator, I would like to thank you all for participating. I would especially like to thank our speakers, Mr. Felipe Gonzalez, Ms. Rachel Gershuni, and Mr. Djokovic, for their very intriguing remarks at the beginning of this session. And I would like to encourage you all also to stay engaged in this process. As I said, the Migration Network has opened up a discussion space on the website where you can post, thoughts and suggestions immediately after this event. I want to thank you very much again for being with us today. Thank you.